Hi there, I'm Niall Murphy, CEO and co-founder of EVRYTHNG, and welcome to another episode of Real Talk, where we bring together influential minds from across the industry to discuss important issues that are shaping the consumer goods industry and the ecosystem that we're operating within. So today, I have the great pleasure of having a conversation with Margi Van Gogh. Margi is head of supply chain and transportation industries at the World Economic Forum, and a extremely accomplished executive from the transportation and logistics industry prior to joining the World Economic Forum. She's a force of nature, as those of you that know her will know. So we're going to have a conversation exploring what the impact of the pandemic has been on the supply system and learnings and lessons we can draw from that, but also how the global supply system is changing in response to not only the pandemic, but also shifting consumer behaviors and industry responses. So very interesting conversation, and I hope and I'm sure that we'll all enjoy it. So without further ado, let's get real talking with Margi Van Gogh. Hey Margi, wonderful to have you with us here today on Real Talk. Thank you for making the time. I hope you're doing okay.
Well, thank you, Niall. Lovely to be here.
So the last year has been fairly extraordinary for all of us, and you are in the middle of the maelstrom of the disruption of the world supply chain system as a whole. What do you think the biggest challenges are that the industry is facing as we start to emerge from the global pandemic?
Gosh, no small questions. But I think that really, amid a public health crisis and the large-scale kind of government restrictions that have been placed on people's movements, I think that if we think about consumers and myself as a consumer and how we've had to, adapt to new sort of virtual ways of living and working, the scale and scope of these challenges really, and the changes that they bring are resonating, in different ways, in different industry sectors. But in essence, when we look at what it is that at the World Economic Forum we are particularly focused on, I think this resonates with two key themes that we work on. One is, the mission to make the world a better place, but looking at the impact that digitization will have, looking at the impact that decisions around making the world more sustainable will have, are clearly top of mind. And a post-pandemic type of lifestyle is going to bring with it, far more digital aspect to it, in the way that we not just live, learn, are served by the healthcare sector, are served by those who are providing the products that we consume every day. And I think that trend is, probably more pronounced in some global economies than in others, but it's going to be with us ongoing from here on in. It's been accelerated in economies that previously weren't digitized to the same extent. And I think in verticals and in parts of the business sector that certainly weren't, and that is something that we need to consider very carefully.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I guess I tend to think there's this notion that somehow things return to normal or they stabilize, but I guess my opinion is we're probably in a ricocheting set of continued resilience challenges and changes in behavior, right? So when you look specifically at the global supply system, right? I mean, what are the key challenges that today are kind of manifesting, and that you expect to sort of see echoing forward in the system as a whole?
As we think about, I guess, the audience that you have here, I would imagine, and it's implicit in some of the questions that we've conversed upon before, which is really how do we what keeps us awake at night? And I would imagine that to a large extent, what's keeping many of us awake is how do we capture and generate value in an environment where there's exponential growth and demand for convenience, whilst there is the need to balance this with concerns for the environment and sustainability. And at a time where in the supply system, and particularly the supply chains that are that are such a part of the supply system web, is how do we assess and implement risk management and mitigation strategies, and how do we meet this increasing consumer demand for more ethical, responsible products that come cheaper and sooner?
Yeah, and we've been working with the forum on a number of these issues to do with resilience, right? When you, I guess, can you share some views of how you think brands can act to improve their resiliency, and sort of why they need to do that in this environment that we're operating in?
I guess part of this is going to come from sort of personal interest, background, sense of purpose, and the other part is going to come from the sense of purpose that comes from working at an international organization that's heavily engaged in facilitating collaborative approaches that lead to better human outcomes. And I think that there the answer lies. It's kind of a human centricity. How do we all become more resilient and more successful and thrive? It has to be around this element of human centricity and balancing what people are absorbed with in terms of this this desire for convenience, but not at the cost of sustainable solutions and the myriad of challenges that are facing their children and future generations. And I think that for the past few years, citizens around the world have started to become far more engaged in topics related to the environmental and social and if you will, corporate governance, what we talk about as ESGs, with respect to environment and moral values, and how we view pollution, how we view labor standards, how we view and we talk about labor standards, health, safety, well-being of people. And this is driving us to, in a good sense, a much more sustainable world. But this also has the potential to really disrupt corporate agendas, right? If consumers believe that certain companies are paying lip service or do not hold the same set of values when it comes to climate change, diversity, inclusivity. And I think this is where, when we talk about resilient supply systems, safety, inclusivity, clean long-term solutions, the human impact of what we are doing comes into sharp relief actually, and should underpin some of the investments and decisions that we're making around investments.
Yeah, it's fascinating and quite encouraging that whilst we've been through this horrendous disruption of the pandemic, at the same time, actually the sense of consumer response and industry response to sustainability and sort of global security in so far as a climate crisis is concerned, it seems to have actually accelerated, right? And perhaps it's because this black swan of the pandemic is a sort of prelude to that black swan, right? And it's it sort of raises. So I think it's been quite motivating actually, that you would have thought that possibly sustainability agenda would take a back seat while everybody just focused on the immediacy of survival, right? And if you share that perspective, do you see the industry reacting in a similar way?
I certainly agree with you, and I think that we can, this is a kind of a high level broad conversation, but I think that when we look at just the response that companies have had, not just now, but accelerated by this pandemic. This commitment to, for example, science-based targets and accelerating, across value chains. If we have a look at, shippers, conscious shippers, Unilever, already setting these targets in 2017, but the myriad that have just come through more recently. Colgate's moved from commitment to set targets. Nestle's moved from commitments to set targets. IKEA, as I said, Unilever, Amazon has committed to these targets, and I think that we also see that in the transport and asset and manufacturing environment with large automakers, with freight and transport companies. DHL's just put out recently a paper in the last couple of weeks actually, and set targets. We're seeing, Maersk that's committed already in 2019, accelerating their desire to put clean vessels in the water already by 2023 to have kind of a pilot in place. And of course that extends to last mile transport as well. So certainly we're seeing, this is not just a trend anymore. This is happening.
It's very exciting, and I'm in the middle of reading Bill Gates's book on the how we can respond to the climate crisis. It's to see a sort of a constructive attitude is great. So, what do you think should be on sort of front of mind for executives, both within the sort of the logistics and transportation industry, and therefore perhaps, from that point of view, in other people's minds as they look at how we're going to navigate building an increasingly sustainable global supply system? What are you thinking about, and what do you think people should be thinking about?
Well, I think, what I've been thinking about since probably this time next year is what this means for global supply chains, for global sourcing. Are we going to see, more nearshoring? I think we're seeing that in some sectors. If you have a look at, the pharma sector and the debates that are taking place around, for example, the production of vaccines for populations that they you need to fly them kind of halfway around the world. Is there, and the impact that that's having also on inclusivity and the ability to, to have access to certain products. Of course, we're seeing the first world talk about this to a great degree, and this principle of nearshoring. My personal view is that globalization will not reverse, but it will slow. And I think there's going to be, more emphasis on regional diversification, on nearshoring of some production, and certainly production to drive more resilience, rather than, the pure cost efficiency perspective that existed before. Well, I think that's one aspect, which is, this concept of regionalization and nearshoring. The other is certainly around big data, right? And digitization, and how do we generate greater value? That's a question I have. How do we generate greater value from technology and digital investments that can be realized, in my opinion, through a closer collaboration, more co-opetition, if you will, in certain instances, and that co-opetition and collaboration enabling aggregation of data from stakeholders across the value chain, which can then be used, to mitigate risk, to identify what those risks are, to be, far more concrete about scenario planning, using, broader scenario planning in order to assess the potential effects of disruption, whether those disruptions come from pandemics or whether those disruptions come from raw material constraints, or whether those come from geopolitical risk. And certainly I think that organizations need to open, if you will, open the aperture of scenarios that they are considering, to include more of the outliers, more of the best and worst case scenarios. Best case to facilitate investment, to allow for scale and agility, and worst case to allow for agility of response and speed of response. So
before we wrap up, I guess I should ask you what what are you most excited about as you're looking forward? And I suppose, therefore, kind of what kind of projects or programs at the World Economic Forum are you wanting to focus on in the coming period?
I think we've been very fortunate at the World Economic Forum also to have the opportunity to work with you, of course, in some of the work that we're doing, and to work with many of the supply chain, global supply chain organizations that have really demonstrated a desire to collaborate, right? And that excites me, a desire to engage on how we can bridge gaps and have measurable impact, be that at an environmental level with more, sustainable practices, sustainable sourcing, production, distribution, but also societally. So what can we do that is within our gift and within the reach of executives to be more collective in their responses, driving more collective action? And, one of those examples, of course, leads me to, how do we solve for this massive demand for humanitarian support, which is only growing as a result of this pandemic, because we know that there is a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, between the developed world and the developing world, who still today are lagging enormously in terms of even having access to this vaccine, which is going to be a key lever for global economic recovery. So I think what probably I'm super excited about is the opportunity to engage with organizations such as yours as well, who have really had an interest in solving for some of these humanitarian challenges. And particularly when we look at the consumer industry's engagement on this very early on around food and essential goods, and what that might mean as one use case. And another use case might be how we ensure inclusive vaccine distribution, or at least peripherals to enable that. And the challenge really here is related to, if we will, the consumer industry, that hunger is on the rise, that we know that Oxfam has projected that there are going to be up to 12,000 lives a day lost at the moment, compared to half that last year due to starvation. And, the future that we want to create together really is around providing the humanitarians with access to industry and public stakeholder support, where a system-wide view can be created through this data aggregation, this collaboration around data, to allow us to use near real-time visibility on the flow of food or essential goods at a global and a local level, which just allows for us to identify where there are bottlenecks and how we can get crucial humanitarian supplies where they need to be sooner in the face of a disruption rather than later, because that is going to save lives. And, in essence, I think that harnessing, data and existing technology and platforms to create this kind of open source visibility tool set that allows us to not destroy any competitive advantage, but rather look at least granular levels, anonymized information, whether that is commodity information, whether it's open source disruption data that already exists from that, from NASA, weather predictions, etc., or whether it is transport data that you bring together in order to develop, what we're working on is this conceptual global supply system visibility tool or dashboard. And we're engaging with a number of international parties, governments, industry bodies, and a wide range of ecosystem players around these use cases in order to develop such a meta layer of visibility, so that we're able to respond sooner and allow humanitarians the insight that many private sector for-profit businesses have acquired at a vertical level. We're looking to create at a horizontal level, and thereby protect lives and livelihoods and those most vulnerable. And that is something very purposeful and always excites me when I think about what is possible and how transformative that could be.
No, it's tremendously important work, and was it Winston Churchill who said, "Never waste a good crisis," right? And I think that the opportunity that exists now is really to create a sort of internet of traceability, really, and bring that visibility together, and the motivation in a crisis response is there to do it. But that's then sets up so much more for the future, and collaboration is the only way it's going to get done, and this is where organizations, the World Economic Forum is obviously in an extraordinary position to facilitate that, which is a fantastic and super privilege to be able to be involved in that with you. So Margi, thank you for your time today, and really insightful conversation. Appreciate it, and looking forward to continue collaboration with you.
Thank you so much, Niall. Appreciate the opportunity, and as you say, the opportunity to learn from innovative organizations such as your own, and leverage that for better human outcomes, and that's it. It truly is a privilege. So thank you. The feeling is mutual.
Thanks, Margi.